The ambush. The desert sun hung like a merciless eye over the rocky terrain of eastern Afghanistan, casting long shadows between the jagged peaks that surrounded the narrow mountain pass. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos adjusted her helmet and checked her weapon for the third time in 10 minutes. The convoy of 5 armored vehicles crawled through the treacherous path, their engines grinding against the steep incline as dust clouds billowed behind them. Maria had been deployed to this godforsaken corner of the world for 8 months now, long enough to know that silence in these mountains usually meant trouble. The radio chatter from the lead vehicle crackled through her headset, reporting normal conditions ahead, but something felt wrong. Her instincts, honed by countless missions in hostile territory, screamed danger. "Santos, you see anything out there?" called out Corporal James Mitchell from the gunner's position above her. His voice carried the same tension she felt in her chest. "Negative, but keep your eyes open," she replied, scanning the rocky outcroppings that lined both sides of the narrow pass. "This place gives me the creeps." The convoy was returning from a successful mission to deliver medical supplies to a remote village near the Pakistani border. What should have been a routine operation had taken longer than expected when they discovered the village elder's daughter needed emergency medical attention. Maria had spent 2 hours helping the unit's medics stabilize the young girl before they could arrange for a helicopter evacuation. Now, as they made their way back to base, the late afternoon sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon. The shadows grew longer and darker, creating perfect hiding spots for anyone who might want to cause trouble. Maria's truck was third in the convoy, positioned between the lead vehicles and the rear guard. It was a strategic position that allowed her to respond quickly to threats from either direction. The radio suddenly burst to life with urgent chatter from the point vehicle. Contact front, we've got movement in the rocks ahead." Before anyone could respond, the world exploded into chaos. The distinctive crack of AK-47 rifles echoed off the canyon walls as muzzle flashes appeared from multiple positions among the rocks. The lead vehicle's windshield spiderwebbed from incoming rounds, and the driver fought to maintain control as bullets sparked off the armored plating. "Ambush, ambush," screamed the voice on the radio. "We're taking heavy fire from elevated positions." Maria's training kicked in immediately. She grabbed her M4 rifle and prepared to engage, but their vehicle was trapped in the middle of the convoy with limited maneuverability. The narrow pass offered no room to turn around, and the steep walls on either side made it impossible to find cover. "Driver, get us closer to those rocks," she shouted over the din of gunfire. "We need to get out of this kill zone." The ambush had been perfectly planned. The attackers had waited until the entire convoy was stretched out along the most vulnerable section of the pass before opening fire. From their elevated positions, they had clear fields of fire down into the vehicles below, while the convoy members were forced to shoot upward at partially concealed targets. Corporal Mitchell was already returning fire from the gun turret, his machine gun chattering as he tried to suppress the enemy positions. Brass casings rained down into the vehicle as he swept back and forth, looking for targets among the rocks. But for every muzzle flash he spotted, 2 more seemed to appear from different positions. "They've got us pinned down good," he yelled. "There's got to be at least 15 of them up there." The radio erupted with reports from all along the convoy. The rear vehicle reported taking fire from behind, confirming Maria's worst fears. They weren't just facing an ambush, they were completely surrounded. The enemy had positioned fighters both ahead of and behind the convoy, trapping them in a deadly crossfire. "All units, this is actual," came the voice of Lieutenant, the convoy commander. "We're surrounded and taking heavy casualties. Request immediate air support and medical evacuation." But Maria knew that help was at least 30 minutes away, and that was if everything went perfectly. 30 minutes was an eternity in a firefight like this. She could hear the distinctive whistle of rocket-propelled grenades overhead, and explosions rocked the canyon as the enemy tried to disable their vehicles. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. The lead vehicle's radio went silent after taking a direct hit from an RPG, and thick black smoke began pouring from its engine compartment. Maria watched in horror as the crew bilayed out, dragging their wounded driver toward whatever cover they could find among the scattered rocks at the base of the canyon wall. "Santos, we need to do something," Mitchell called down to her. "They're going to pick us off one by one if we stay here." Maria's mind raced as she assessed their tactical situation. The enemy had chosen their ambush site well. The narrow pass offered limited options for escape or maneuver, and the high ground gave them every advantage. Standard doctrine called for finding cover and waiting for reinforcements, but Maria could see that wasn't going to work here. Through her tactical training and combat experience, she knew they needed to break the enemy's advantage somehow. The attackers were confident in their positions, believing they had the Americans trapped. But confidence could become complacency, and complacency could be exploited. "Mitchell, can you see the trail that leads up the left side of the canyon?" she asked, pointing toward a barely visible path that zigzagged up the rocky slope. "Yeah, I see it. Looks like a goat path or something." "That's our ticket out of this mess. If I can get up there and flank them from above, I can take out their positions one by one." Mitchell stared at her in disbelief. "Are you crazy? That's a suicide mission. You'll be completely exposed climbing up there." But Maria had already made up her mind. She had studied the terrain during their approach, noting every detail of the surrounding landscape out of habit. The path was dangerous and exposed, but it also led to a position where she could gain the high ground advantage. "Cover me when I make my move," she told Mitchell. "And radio the lieutenant. Tell him to concentrate fire on the positions directly ahead when I give the signal." She checked her equipment one final time. Her M4 rifle was loaded and ready, with 4 extra magazines secured in her tactical vest. She carried 2 fragmentation grenades and a combat knife, along with basic medical supplies and emergency rations. It wasn't much for what she was about to attempt, but it would have to be enough. The gunfire continued to echo through the canyon as both sides exchanged shots. Maria could hear the distinctive crack of sniper rifles mixed in with the automatic weapons fire, indicating that the enemy had marksmen positioned to pick off anyone who showed themselves. The situation was getting worse by the minute. She keyed her radio and contacted the convoy commander. "Lieutenant, this is Santos. I'm going to attempt to flank the enemy positions from the left side of the canyon." "Negative, Santos. Too dangerous. Stay with your vehicle." "Sir, with respect, we're sitting ducks down here. If I can get above them, I can break up their positions and give us a chance." There was a long pause as explosions continued to rock the convoy. Finally, his voice came back over the radio, tight with tension and resignation. "Understood, Santos. You're cleared to attempt flanking maneuver. All units will provide covering fire on your signal." Maria took a deep breath and prepared herself mentally for what lay ahead. She had trained for situations like this, but no amount of training could fully prepare someone for the reality of combat. The adrenaline coursing through her system sharpened her senses while simultaneously making her heart pound like a drum in her chest. The path up the canyon wall would take her through approximately 200 meters of exposed terrain before she could reach a position where the rocks would provide adequate cover. 200 meters of open ground, while enemy fighters with automatic weapons and sniper rifles tried to kill her. She thought briefly of her family back home in Texas, her parents who had been so proud when she enlisted, her younger brother who looked up to her as a hero. They believed she was making a difference in the world, fighting to protect freedom and democracy. Now she was about to find out if all those beliefs were worth dying for. "On my mark," she radioed to Mitchell and the other vehicles. 3, 2, 1, mark." The canyon erupted in a thunderous barrage as every American weapon opened fire simultaneously. Machine guns chattered, rifles cracked, and the remaining vehicles launched everything they had at the enemy positions. The covering fire was so intense that, for a moment, the incoming fire slackened as the attackers were forced to take cover. Maria burst from her vehicle and sprinted toward the base of the canyon wall, her boots sliding on loose rocks as she fought for traction. The path was even steeper than it had looked from below, and she quickly realized that the climb was going to be more difficult than she had anticipated. The climb. The rocky path proved to be even more treacherous than Maria had expected. What had appeared to be solid ground from below turned out to be loose shale and crumbling stone that shifted under her weight with each step. Her boots struggled for purchase as she climbed, sending small avalanches of rocks tumbling down behind her that could potentially give away her position to the enemy fighters. Halfway up the slope, the covering fire from below began to diminish as her fellow soldiers ran low on ammunition and had to conserve their rounds. The enemy quickly recognized the decrease in suppressing fire and resumed their assault on the convoy with renewed intensity. Maria could hear the increase in incoming rounds as she pressed herself against the canyon wall, trying to make herself as small a target as possible. A bullet cracked past her head, so close she could feel the displacement of air against her cheek. The enemy had spotted her movement and was now actively trying to prevent her flanking maneuver. She could hear shouted commands in a foreign language echoing from above, followed by the sound of multiple weapons being repositioned to target her location. "Santos, you've got at least 3 shooters tracking your movement," Mitchell's voice crackled through her earpiece. "They're adjusting fire to your position." Maria pressed herself deeper into a shallow depression in the rock face as more bullets sparked off the stone around her. Chips of granite peppered her helmet and body armor as the enemy fighters tried to pin her down. She was trapped between the covering positions below and the enemy above, with nowhere to go but forward. The path ahead curved around a large boulder that would provide temporary concealment from the shooters above. But reaching it meant crossing 15 meters of completely open ground where she would be exposed from multiple angles. She studied the terrain carefully, looking for any advantage she could exploit. Below her, the convoy was still taking heavy fire. She could see smoke rising from at least 2 of the vehicles, and the radio chatter indicated multiple casualties among the crew members. Time was running out fast. Every minute she spent pinned down on the mountainside was another minute the enemy had to consolidate their positions and call in reinforcements. Maria made her decision quickly. Instead of trying to cross the exposed area during daylight, she would use the enemy's own tactics against them. She pulled out one of her fragmentation grenades, calculated the distance and trajectory, and prepared to create her own covering fire. "Mitchell, when you see my grenade explode up here, lay down everything you've got on the positions above me," she radioed. "Roger that, standing by." She pulled the pin and counted off 3 seconds before hurling the grenade toward the enemy positions above. The explosion echoed through the canyon like thunder, and immediately the American weapons below opened up with sustained fire. Under cover of the noise and confusion, Maria sprinted across the open ground toward the boulder. The maneuver worked perfectly. By the time the enemy fighters recovered from the grenade blast and resumed shooting, she was already safely behind the large rock formation. But now came the really dangerous part of her climb. The path ahead led directly through what appeared to be the enemy's primary defensive position. From her new vantage point, Maria could see the layout of the ambush more clearly. The attackers had positioned themselves in a rough semicircle around the convoy route, with their strongest positions concentrated on the high ground where they could observe the entire length of the pass. They had prepared these positions carefully, with sandbags and rock walls providing excellent cover from return fire. But their confidence in their defensive positions had also created a weakness. The fighters were so focused on the convoy below that they had positioned themselves with their backs to the upper reaches of the canyon. They had never expected anyone to be crazy enough to attempt a flanking maneuver up the treacherous slope. Maria studied the enemy positions through her rifle scope, counting at least 8 fighters in the immediate area. They were armed with a mix of AK-47 assault rifles, rocket-propelled grenade launchers, and what appeared to be at least 1 sniper rifle with a high-powered scope. Professional fighters, well-equipped and disciplined. The nearest enemy position was only 30 meters away, occupied by 2 men with an RPG launcher. They were positioned behind a natural rock formation that provided excellent concealment from below, but left them vulnerable to attack from the side. If she could take them out quietly, she could use their position as a stepping stone to reach the other enemy fighters. Moving with the stealth techniques she had learned in advanced infantry training, Maria began to work her way toward the RPG team. The loose rocks that had hindered her climb now worked to her advantage, providing natural camouflage as she belly crawled from one position to another. Her digital camouflage uniform blended well with the mottled shadows cast by the afternoon sun. The 2 enemy fighters were focused entirely on the convoy below, taking turns with the RPG launcher while keeping up a steady stream of rifle fire. They were talking quietly to each other in what sounded like Pashto, pointing out targets and coordinating their attacks. Maria crept closer, her heart pounding as she prepared for her first close-quarters engagement. At 20 meters distance, she could see that both men were young, probably in their early 20s, with the lean, hardened look of experienced mountain fighters. They moved with the confidence of men who had done this many times before, efficiently reloading their weapons, and communicating with hand signals when necessary. Maria positioned herself behind a cluster of rocks that provided a stable shooting platform while keeping her concealed from the other enemy positions. She would have to take both targets quickly and quietly to avoid alerting the rest of the ambush team. Through her rifle scope, she could see the distinctive features of their faces, the determination in their eyes as they continued their attack on her fellow soldiers below. For a moment, she hesitated. These were human beings, probably fighting for what they believed was the defense of their homeland. They might have families waiting for them, children who would never see their fathers come home. But then she heard the explosion of another RPG hitting one of the convoy vehicles, followed by screams of pain and calls for medical assistance over the radio. Her finger found the trigger of her M4 rifle as she lined up her first shot. The weapon was set to semi-automatic mode to ensure accuracy and conserve ammunition. She controlled her breathing, the way she had been taught at the rifle range, letting half the air out of her lungs before holding steady. The first shot took the RPG gunner in the center of his chest, spinning him around and dropping him instantly. Before his partner could react, Maria had already shifted her aim and fired again. The second fighter managed to turn toward her position before the bullet caught him in the shoulder, sending him tumbling behind the rocks. But he wasn't dead, and he began shouting warnings to his fellow fighters in their native language. The element of surprise was lost, and Maria knew she had only seconds before the entire enemy force would be focused on her position. She could already hear voices calling out from the other positions as the remaining fighters tried to locate the source of the shooting. Maria quickly moved to the captured position, grabbing the fallen fighter's ammunition and the RPG launcher. The wounded fighter was still alive but unconscious, bleeding heavily from his shoulder wound. She applied a field bandage to stop the bleeding, following her military training even in the middle of combat. The RPG launcher was a Soviet-era design that she was familiar with from her weapons training. It was loaded and ready to fire, with 2 additional rounds lying beside it. She now had the high ground and a weapon capable of turning the tide of the battle, but she was still outnumbered and surrounded by enemy fighters who were rapidly closing in on her position. From her new vantage point, Maria could see the entire enemy defensive layout. There were 3 more primary positions, each containing 2 to 3 fighters with various weapons. The largest group was positioned in what appeared to be a natural cave formation about 50 meters to her right, where they had set up what looked like a machine gun nest. Below in the convoy, the situation was becoming desperate. She could see that the lead vehicle was completely destroyed, with its crew taking cover behind the wreckage. The second vehicle was smoking heavily and appeared to have lost its main weapon. Only 3 vehicles remained operational, and they were running low on ammunition after providing covering fire for her flanking maneuver. "Santos, report your status," came Lieutenant's voice over the radio. "I'm in position and have eliminated 2 enemy fighters," she reported while scanning for her next target. "I can see their entire defensive layout from here. Give me 2 minutes and I'll start taking out their positions." "Roger that. Be advised, air support is still 15 minutes out. We need you to break up their positions so we can start moving wounded to a safer location." Maria understood the urgency in the lieutenant's voice. Without medical evacuation soon, some of the wounded convoy members might not survive. She had to move quickly and decisively to disrupt the enemy attack and create an opportunity for the convoy to either escape or establish a more defensible position. She selected the machine gun nest as her first target for the RPG launcher. Taking out their heaviest weapon would significantly reduce the enemy's firepower and give the convoy vehicles a chance to maneuver. She carefully aimed the launcher, accounting for the distance and the downward angle of her shot. The rocket streaked down the mountainside and exploded directly in the center of the enemy position, sending rocks and debris flying in all directions. The machine gun fell silent immediately, and Maria could see figures running from the destroyed position toward other cover. But now every remaining enemy fighter knew exactly where she was located. Automatic weapons fire began raking her position as the surviving attackers tried to suppress her while they repositioned their forces. She was forced to keep her head down as bullets sparked off the rocks around her, searching for any gap in her cover. The radio crackled with excited chatter from the convoy below as they recognized the opportunity her attack had created. "All vehicles, this is actual. Santos has knocked out their heavy weapon. Second and third vehicles start moving wounded to the rear of the formation. Fourth vehicle lay down suppressing fire on the remaining positions. Maria reloaded the RPG launcher with her second round and began looking for her next target. The remaining enemy positions were now alert and actively hunting for her, but she still held the advantage of elevation and surprise. The question was whether she could maintain that advantage long enough to break the ambush completely. The final stand. The remaining enemy fighters had regrouped quickly after losing their machine gun position, demonstrating the tactical discipline that made them so dangerous. Maria could see them moving through the rocks above her, trying to surround her position from multiple directions. They had realized that eliminating her was now their top priority if they wanted to maintain their ambush of the convoy. Through her rifle scope, she counted at least 6 fighters still active, armed with assault rifles and at least one more RPG launcher. They were using fire and movement tactics, with some fighters providing covering fire while others advanced to new positions. These weren't untrained militia fighters. They were experienced combat veterans who understood small unit tactics. A grenade exploded 20 meters to her left, showering her position with rock fragments and dust. The enemy was using their own grenades to flush her out of cover, forcing her to either move or be destroyed in place. Maria knew she couldn't stay in her current position much longer, but moving meant exposing herself to crossfire from multiple directions. "Santos, we're seeing movement all around your position," Mitchell's voice crackled through her earpiece. "Looks like they're trying to surround you." "I see them," she replied, while tracking one fighter who was attempting to work his way around to her right flank. "I'm going to try to break their line before they can complete the encirclement." The fighter she was tracking made the mistake of exposing himself for too long while moving between rocks. Maria's rifle cracked once, and the man tumbled backward out of sight. That left 5 active enemies, but they were getting closer with each passing minute. Below in the convoy, the Americans were using the temporary respite to reorganize their defenses and tend to their wounded. She could see medics working frantically on several casualties near the damaged vehicles, while the remaining gun crews maintained watch for any renewed attack from the enemy positions she hadn't yet eliminated. But Maria knew the situation was still critical. Even if she managed to break up the current ambush, the enemy would likely call for reinforcements from other cells operating in the area. The convoy needed to get moving toward friendly territory as quickly as possible before they found themselves facing an even larger force. A burst of automatic weapons fire forced her to duck behind cover as bullets whined overhead. When she looked up again, she saw 3 fighters advancing on her position in a coordinated assault. They were using classic bounding Overwatch tactics, with one man moving while the other 2 provided covering fire, then switching roles to continue the advance. Maria fired her second RPG round at the advancing fighters, but they had anticipated her move and were already diving for cover when the rocket exploded. The blast caught one of them in the legs, sending him rolling down the slope, but the other 2 continued their advance from new positions. She was down to her rifle and her last grenade, facing multiple enemies who were closing in fast. The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly, and she knew she had to do something dramatic to break the enemy's momentum. Sometimes the best defense was an aggressive offense, even when the odds were stacked against you. Instead of waiting for the enemy to reach her position, Maria decided to attack them directly. She pulled the pin on her fragmentation grenade and threw it toward the nearest enemy position, then immediately began moving toward the fighters on her left flank. The grenade explosion provided cover for her movement as she sprinted across the rocky ground with her rifle ready. The maneuver caught the enemy fighters off guard. They had expected her to remain in a defensive position, not to launch her own assault while outnumbered. Her sudden appearance from an unexpected direction disrupted their coordinated attack and forced them to react rather than continue executing their plan. Maria's M4 rifle fired rapidly as she engaged the closest enemy fighter at close range. The man was turning toward her when her first shot caught him in the chest, spinning him around. His rifle clattered down the rocks as he fell, leaving his partner momentarily without covering fire. But now she was completely exposed on the open mountainside, with enemy fighters above and below her position. Bullets cracked past her from multiple directions as the remaining attackers tried to bracket her location. She dove behind a fallen boulder just as a burst of automatic weapons fire chewed up the ground where she had been standing. From her new position, Maria could see that her aggressive assault had achieved its primary objective. The enemy fighters were no longer coordinating their movements effectively, instead reacting to her actions rather than executing their own plan. But she was also in a much more vulnerable position, with limited cover and ammunition running low. "Air support, this is Convoy Actual," she heard Lieutenant calling over the radio. "We need immediate close air support at grid coordinates." The transmission was interrupted by static as another explosion rocked the convoy below. Maria knew that air support was still several minutes away, and the situation couldn't wait that long. She had to finish what she started with the resources she had available. Looking around her immediate area, she spotted something that might give her the edge she needed. About 30 meters above her current position, she could see what appeared to be a large pile of loose rocks balanced precariously on a narrow ledge. The pile looked unstable, as if it had been created by a recent rock slide and was held in place only by gravity and luck. If she could find a way to trigger another slide, it might take out the remaining enemy positions below. The plan was risky and would require precise timing, but it was better than trying to fight multiple enemy fighters with limited ammunition. Maria studied the rock formation carefully, looking for the best way to destabilize the pile. A well-placed shot or explosive device might be enough to trigger a cascade that would send tons of rock tumbling down onto the enemy positions. She began working her way up toward the rock pile, using every bit of cover available as enemy bullets continued to search for her. The climb was exhausting, and her body armor felt like it weighed 100 pounds as she pulled herself up the steep slope. Sweat poured down her face inside her helmet, and her hands were scraped and bleeding from grabbing onto sharp rocks. Halfway to her objective, Maria heard the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors echoing through the canyon. The cavalry was finally arriving, but she couldn't tell if it was medical evacuation or attack helicopters. Either way, she needed to clear the enemy positions before the aircraft could safely approach the convoy. A sniper's bullet cracked past her helmet, so close she could feel the heat of its passage. One of the enemy fighters had found a position with a clear line of sight to her location, and he was methodically trying to zero in on her movement. Each shot was getting closer as he adjusted his aim. Maria pressed herself against the rock face and tried to spot the sniper's position. She could see a muzzle flash from a crevice in the rocks about 40 meters away, partially concealed by natural camouflage. The shooter had excellent cover and a commanding view of the entire area, making him extremely dangerous to both her and any approaching aircraft. Time was running out fast. She could hear more radio chatter from the convoy below indicating that the wounded needed immediate evacuation, but the landing zone wasn't secure with enemy snipers still active. Everything depended on her ability to neutralize the remaining threats quickly and decisively. With her remaining ammunition, Maria couldn't afford to waste shots trying to suppress the sniper from her current position. She needed to get close enough for a guaranteed hit, which meant moving through his field of fire to reach an effective range. It was a calculated risk that could easily cost her life if she miscalculated. The sound of helicopter rotors was getting louder, indicating that the aircraft were approaching fast. Maria made her decision and began moving again, timing her movement to coincide with the noise of the approaching helicopters. The engine sound would mask any noise she made climbing through the rocks. She reached the unstable rock pile just as the first helicopter appeared over the canyon rim. It was an Apache attack helicopter, its sensors scanning for enemy targets while its weapons systems prepared to engage. But the pilot couldn't risk firing with friendly forces scattered throughout the area and enemy positions mixed in among the natural terrain. Maria positioned herself above the loose rocks and carefully aimed her rifle at the key stone that seemed to be holding the entire pile in place. If her analysis was correct, removing that single rock would trigger a massive landslide that would eliminate the remaining enemy positions below. "All friendly forces, this is Santos," she radioed to the convoy and the approaching aircraft. "I'm about to trigger a rock slide on the enemy positions. Take cover and prepare for falling debris." She took careful aim at the supporting stone and fired 3 rapid shots. The bullets chipped away at the rock face, and she could see cracks spreading through the supporting structure. For a moment, nothing happened, and she wondered if her plan had failed. Then, with a deep rumbling sound that echoed through the entire canyon, the rock pile began to collapse. Thousands of pounds of stone and debris tumbled down the mountainside, gathering speed and mass as gravity took hold. The sound was deafening, like an avalanche of destruction rolling toward the enemy positions below. Maria watched in amazement as the rockslide swept away the remaining enemy fighters, burying their positions under tons of stone and dirt. The sniper's position disappeared completely, along with the other defensive positions that had pinned down the convoy for so long. The sudden silence that followed was almost as stunning as the destruction itself. After nearly an hour of constant gunfire and explosions, the canyon was quiet except for the sound of the helicopters and the settling of disturbed rocks. The ambush had been broken completely. "Holy shit, Santos," Mitchell's voice exploded through her earpiece. "That was incredible, you just buried half the mountain." But Maria was already moving down toward the convoy, her mission far from over. There were wounded soldiers who needed medical attention, and the convoy still had to make it back to base safely. The immediate threat had been eliminated, but they were still in hostile territory with enemy reinforcements potentially en route. The Apache helicopter circled overhead providing security, while a medical evacuation helicopter landed near the convoy vehicles. Maria could see medics rushing toward the casualties, their Red Cross armbands clearly visible as they worked to stabilize the wounded for transport. As she reached the bottom of the canyon, Lieutenant approached her with a mixture of relief and amazement on his face. "Santos, that was the most incredible piece of tactical improvisation I've ever witnessed. You single-handedly saved this entire convoy." But Maria was already focused on the next challenge. "Sir, we need to get moving. This much noise is going to attract attention from every hostile force within 20 kilometers. We need to reach friendly territory before they can organize another attack." Within minutes, the convoy was reorganized and moving again. The most seriously wounded had been evacuated by helicopter, while the remaining personnel consolidated into the operational vehicles. Maria took her position in the lead vehicle this time, her experience and proven tactical skills making her the obvious choice to guide them through any additional threats. As they drove away from the ambush site, Maria looked back at the pile of rocks that had been her salvation. The enemy fighters buried beneath that stone would never threaten another American convoy, but she took no satisfaction in their deaths. They had been doing their job just as she had been doing hers, and war was ultimately a tragedy for everyone involved. But her fellow soldiers were alive because of her actions, and that was what mattered most. She had upheld her oath to protect her comrades and complete the mission, regardless of the personal cost. The convoy reached base safely 2 hours later, and Maria's actions that day would become part of military legend. In the weeks that followed, she would receive commendations for her courage and tactical brilliance, but the real reward was seeing her fellow soldiers return home to their families. That night in the canyon had tested everything she believed about duty, honor, and sacrifice, and she had proven herself worthy of the trust placed in her by her country and her comrades.